To cry, to love, to care. All of these terms remain stagnant yet exclusive. We care for those around us, using the universal thing of emotion, shoving those we despise away whilst clinging on to those we most aspire to be. Whilst we may cry at the ending of Coco, or the beginning of Up, our emotions seem to be opened in the most beautiful way when it comes to the prospect of sadness. With this, I feel the album DC Snuff Film / Waste Yourself is an omnipotent piece of media, exempt from the regular bounds of music. Teen suicide's magnum opus. It's an album depicting love, depression, the wallowing of one's own sadness. It's an incredibly real, auditory experience that I can only really compare to Everywhere at the End of Time. I'm really into punk music personally, but the sounds and serenades of this album took me to another universe. This album is an incredibly common piece of art which has diffused my mental mind on numerous occasions. It has managed to alter my trepidation and energy in such a way where I can finally breathe. There are a total of 19 tracks, which can all be put into different subgenres in the scheme of the album: love, depression, and the haunting. All of these titles seem self-explanatory, except for The Haunted, which I'll get into. Love is conceptually the most obvious. The protagonist of this album falls in love with a girl head over heels, wishing to spend all of his time with her. Depression is the realization that the girl he has fallen for doesn't feel the same. It's the sadness and mental anguish the protagonist goes through when hit with the truth that she doesn't love him like he does her. The Haunted, which is probably the most mysterious one, is the thoughts that linger of the one who got away, with the protagonist being haunted by her seemingly everywhere he goes. Of course, the album isn't exclusive to these themes of love and heartbreak, with there also being clues of drug addiction, fake friends, and even suicide sprinkled everywhere throughout the lyrics. The album starts off on an insanely low note with the song Everything Is Fine, where the narrator speaks of his depression along with his ex-friend who stole from him and did heroin. The narrator in this portion is just out of a relationship, at his lowest low, with his mind and happiness in the shitter. This low is immediately followed up with Don't Like Me, a song detailing his love and how she didn't like him as much as he loved her. And the relationship was basically parasitic, with the narrator depending on her while she didn't need him. It's little throwbacks like this one where we see what leads to the narrator's current predicament of depression and loneliness. Bad News is where he proceeds to isolate himself out of sadness, cutting off all of his friends due to his own love being gone. Surf's Up immediately goes back into his desperation with the pardon of his girl. He's sad and in a need for love. He attempts to regain the same relationship, getting high to feel something and picking up chicks absent-mindedly. This same now drug-dependent protagonist is seen on Skate Witches. Finally, though, we get a glimpse back into the life that was, with him reminiscing on the good times there was on the songs High and Oh My God. Where he dreams about the one he longed for. All of this culminates to the lowest of lows on the album, with the songs Worthless, Swimmin', I'm So Fucking Bored, Lonely Boy Goes to a Rave, and Benzo detailing his drug abuse. And skewed perspective on the world. This is my favorite section of the album because most of this is not conveyed through words, with Worthless being a loud, breathless sound of instruments, really conveying how the narrator has been overcome by his depression, as contrast to I'm So Fucking Bored, with its slow sound showing the lack of feeling he has now established. Haunt Me X3 is the narrator dwelling on his love, but unlike in his former envy on what he had, he begins to accept it's gone, with him realizing how he's let the sadness control him, and he has to face it head on. This is continued on Fallen in Love, with the final lyrics, I could have hit my head on a million different things, but it's not my time to die. Showing the now ending to his dependence on her. He no longer longs to die in a life without her, and is ready to move on. Salvia Plath is a look back on the relationship, remembering his desperateness to make her feel loved and appreciated by any means necessary. But unlike the past look backs of cynicism, he looks back with a bit of whimsicalness and hopefulness. Because although the relationship has ended, and he's sad about it, he now accepts the beautiful thing that it was, and begins to realize that he's not just half of a human being without her, and instead, he can live on to do great things. Doing All the Things I Used to Do with People Part 2 is the narrator finally looking at himself and seeing what all of this has turned him into. He's wallowed in sadness for too long, and he acknowledges that he's given so much thought to something which lacks real meaning in the grand scheme of his life, and overall, it's time to move on and better himself.
This is not a song about sleep or death. It's about something much smaller and paler than that. 'Cause when I came home, lost 30-something pounds.
We found 2 dead swans and filled their bodies with flowers as the climax, with him finally saying he doesn't want to die. He's done with the life he has forced himself to live, and chooses to finally reconcile with his sadness, and accept he's lost what he once had. This is even shown in the song having an almost ghostly sound haunting the intro that's immediately interrupted by a hopeful guitar. Doing All the Things I Used to Do with People Part 2 Acoustic is my favorite song on the album. It's the end, and it shows the narrator moving on, now talking to a girl he loves.
Wait, hold on. Really slow.
It's his triumph over his sadness, which is a story told through brilliant instruments and lyrics. There's beauty in the midst of tragedy. Teen Suicide's DC snuff film / Waste Yourself is a beautiful album, which has completely changed not only how I look at music, but how I look at life. It's extremely real and in touch with the emotions of depression, a relationship, and the breakup which ensues, facing the highs and lows, given both the same amount of attention, making every song feel necessary and reflective of the life the protagonist leads. Teen Suicide, now known as American Pleasure Club, are insanely talented artists, and if you haven't checked them out, you really should listen to their music. Their other albums are on some of the same levels as this one. They're a band which has saved me from the fear of presenting, and enabled a spaz like me some tranquility for moments where I need to stay still. They're insanely talented, and honestly made a work of art with this album. It's been a real video, and if I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.